Hey, deserving listeners, I'm going back and rewatching season 3, Love is Blind, and just watching the key scenes and reacting. Let's watch.
Uh-oh. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. It's okay. It's okay.
There's a slight chance that this scene of her crying was from someone else breaking up with her, but I think the cast members have said that although some things were compressed, or all the things were compressed in time and maybe switched things around, the show didn't lie overtly. So I think this probably is accurate. But anyway, yeah, those kind of tears, it just doesn't look like someone that's like, well, you know, whatever, he was a friend and he was my 4th pick and I'm totally in love with Matt. So it just doesn't look that way. But there's no way to know because people think differently about this. Not everyone thinks the way everyone else thinks, and certainly not everyone thinks the way I think. So my top hypothesis, so there's one hypothesis where she's being abused by Matt and feels like she has to make up stories so that she won't get abused, meaning that Matt wasn't at the top of the list initially, but she is trying to reword that because she has learned through experience if she doesn't frame it that way, Matt will abuse her. There's no direct evidence of that at all. I want to be clear, at least at this point, as you know, when I'm recording this in late December. So that could be, but my top hypothesis is, you know, using Occam's razor, I suppose, is that she feels bad for Matt, and because the way the show is edited, it was like Cole and Brennan were higher on the list than Matt, and so she gets married, and let's say that she likes being married at this point, that she is happy with her choice, and she doesn't want to be with Cole, she doesn't want to be with Brennan, she wants to be with Matt. So I think that that's probable. And then she feels bad about his feelings, not because he's going to be abusive necessarily, but she just doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And she's trying to be considerate. And so in her mind, she's like, okay, well, how do I reword the whole thing? And she comes up with all these details that are in that effort of trying to save Matt's feelings. But when you hear them all, they don't really hold together in terms of, at least from a viewer's standpoint. Maybe they do to Matt. I don't know, because we don't know all the details. And what I said before is, if what we're seeing is along those lines, I would have, and she had come to me as a friend and was saying, what do I say? I would have recommended that Colleen say something that is the truth, but just in a different light. Instead of just making up things, just say the truth, because it's so much easier to stick with the truth, and the truth tends to hold together. The truth tends to be more convincing because people can usually detect when things don't hold together. They're not coherent ideas. And so I might recommend something like, hey, well, you could say to Matt something like, hey, yes, originally you were not at the top of the list. And, you know, this happens sometimes. People will date and they will say like, well, like Bob and Colleen, if you've listened to my audio podcast, for Bob and Colleen, and they've been together, I don't know, 17 years, something like 20 years, and they're happily married. And so for Bob, when he met Colleen, he was into her and she was not into him. But Colleen, a different Colleen, Bob's Colleen had a policy that she always went on a second date because sometimes first impressions aren't reliable. So she goes on a second date, and then they go on a second date, and then that's when she's like, oh yeah, I do really like this person, and then they ended up, they're still together. So that happens sometimes, right? And Colleen could say something like, be like, hey, you know, Matt, at first I had Cole and Brennan, you know, in the pods, we barely knew any of these people. I was just shooting the dark kind of. And I thought, you know, my best chance would be with Cole. Knowing him now, that's ridiculous, but the information I had before me in the pods, I had him at the top list. Brennan was up there too. Again, knowing him now, we would have been a disaster together. But you were lower on the list because of, I don't know, I just didn't really know you as well as I knew the others or whatever. And then when Cole and Brennan rejected me and I was sad, I started kind of rethinking you, and I put you higher on the list, not because I was desperate, but because I just started kind of appreciating you more. Then I said, you know what, I think I could be with Matt. I think I should have always had Matt at the top of my list. Then we get engaged. Then we meet in person, and I'm like, hallelujah, attractive guy, I want to be this guy. We get married. We've been together for a year and a half now. And I'm just so glad that those two guys who I had higher on the list rejected me, because I would never have been with you. And like, praise God that they did reject me, because I'm with you. That's closer to what's being presented, right? And probably kind of true, right? That at one point, other people were higher on the list, but I barely knew any of you. I barely knew you at the time. So now I don't know if what I'm saying is the truth, but I would say something like that. You don't have to rework history, especially since there's a TV show that people can watch, including Matt, and confirm or disconfirm the things that you're saying. You know what I mean? Because if you're trying to help your partner, it's not going to necessarily help them if you come across as shady. Now, I don't know what y'all think of it. And by the way, I've recorded a lot of these Love is Blind episodes prior to me posting them. So if you've commented or there's been like a general message to me in the comment sections and I don't seem to be reacting to it, it's because I either didn't see it or I haven't seen them yet because I haven't posted those episodes. Just keep that in mind.
Come on, baby. Come on, baby. Take a deep breath, okay? Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath.
What am I top two?
Well, she just said that Brennan was one of her top two. This was someone else that she's talking about. And well, so what she could say is Matt was number one and Brennan was two. She didn't say that in the interview. She said Brennan and Cole were 3 and 4. Unless they edited this funny and are completely fraudulent in the edit, which is, completely possible. But at the very least, what we're being seen in the edit is Brennan breaks up with her and she's pretty sad and says, he was one of my top two. That's what she just said.
He was like, I'm not going to lie to you, like, I don't see anything.
Nice deep breath. Nice deep breath.
It's also possible that she could frame it as, I've been broken up with a lot because of people interacting with my personality. And so my tears were more about how often that would happen to me, not necessarily the loss of Brennan, but it just would happen a lot that I would try to, get to know someone. And I've heard this often, like, is there something wrong with me? That would be horrible if that's true for her, but that potentially would be at least evidenced by the show that if she's trying to reassure Matt. Now, again, if she's being abused and she feels like she has to make up stories because of that, then that's a whole other story. It obviously is important that she get to safety and that she get out from under his thumb and get to safety and gets treatment and gets support and perhaps breaks up with him. It kind of depends. And that he should get treatment for it, perhaps mandatory, perhaps maybe going to police because of his potential criminal behavior, if that's true. So I just want to be clear that if abuse is happening, it's just a wholly different story.
I get butthurt if someone doesn't like me.
Yeah?
That's like a knock to my confidence.
Oh, okay.
So that's my own personal struggle, hurdle that I gotta get over. Adios, amiga.
Okay, she kind of talked about that in the interviews as well. I didn't think I'd be focusing on Colleen as much, but there's a lot of scenes that I think just flew past me originally watching it that I didn't note at the time or didn't remember, but she just said that I have an issue when people don't like me. That's another indication, another yellow flag, if you will, of someone that has relational trauma history that is what we call lack of connection with self or lack of self. I don't like the phrase lack of self because that's not accurate. The individual does have a self. They just aren't in connection with it. Everyone has a self. Everyone has emotions and needs and a personality, so to speak, passions. But if you're not connected with it, or you have had to disconnect from it because of your relational traumas, then you have a lack of connection with the self. not a lack of self. The other reason is because people who have a lack of connection with the self, they will falsely conclude that they do not have a self. When they look inward, they'll see emptiness and assume that there's nothing there, when in reality, they just can't see it. It's there, but they feel like since they can't see it, they don't exist as human beings. You'll hear people talk like that. They're empty. There's a emptiness inside. There's an abyss. They feel like when they have to face themselves, they just fall into a deep hole of nothingness. It feels that way, but it's not actually accurate that they don't have a self. Anyway, but she just said that I have an issue when people don't like me. You know, when we aren't in connection with ourselves and we can't rely on ourselves, when we're not grounded in ourselves, then we will look to others to define us and to validate us. And we will be dependent on that. And so when someone doesn't like, so someone that has a connection with the self and they get rejected, it hurts for sure. And they might cry and they might be in despair, it's rejection, it hurts. But they have at least one foot standing on the foundation of their connection with the self, where they're just like, well, I know deep down that I'm a good person. It doesn't feel that way right now. This person, I don't know what they didn't see in me or whatever. But, I have enough experience checking in with myself, and I have enough feedback from other people that I've kind of cataloged as being a reflection of who I am. Because that's the other thing, is that when people lack a connection with the self, they're always just reacting. And so whenever they get praise, they don't really attribute it to them, because they kind of know, or they explicitly know, that their behavior is based on what other people want of them. And they chameleonize themselves, and they're always pleasing other people. So when they get praise, they're like, well, I'm really just getting praise for being pleasing. I'm not really getting praise for who I am, because I don't know who I am. I'm not really manifesting who I am because I don't know who I am. And so they will be frequently looking outside. And so for the person who has a connection with the self, as they're being rejected, they can put one foot on the foundation of the self and say, I'm a good person. I know from experience, people have given me that feedback. People have liked me before. I'll bounce back. I have strength. I have value because I've been shown that I have value to other people, and I've internalized that. And although this is rough, I'll get through it. Whereas people who don't have that to stand on, when someone doesn't like them, they're just falling into the abyss. There's, I'm being invalidated, right? I'm being rejected, even though I'm desperately trying to please. I'm doing everything I can. It's like, I'm a ballerina. I'm a good person. I'll be whatever you want me to be, and I'm still being rejected. So I have no recourse to get validation. I can't turn inward because I don't have any inner resources. And right now I can't turn outward, and I'm completely lost I'm just floating in space without any tether to self-esteem or validation or a path forward or anything. It'd be very, disheartening. So obviously the person without therapy will become even more desperate to try to please other people, will do anything possible to get someone to validate them, even if that means engaging with an abusive partner.
Party has started, or if a guy can, have fun in an awkward moment, then he's the guy for me.
I've been thinking about you, Colleen.
Oh, I've been thinking about you too. No, I loved, our energy. That's important for me. How we vibe off of each other, the banter,
oh my gosh, yes.
I forgot how much they crammed into these episodes, in contrast to other reality TV I watch, like 90 Day, where they just seem to kind of string things out. Love is Blind, I appreciate it because they really cram it in. On the other hand, there's a downside where they leave a lot of stuff out that would be interesting to see, right? Both Cole and Colleen had other people that they were highly interested in that they just didn't show any of the scenes. And, knowing what we know now, it would have been interesting. But anyway, so we're seeing right now, and so I think what's going to happen now is Cole is going to reject her. So I think in the first episode, we see Colleen get rejected by two people, and I also believe that we see Brennan propose to Alexa.
How are you feeling? ...
So now we got that out of the way. Tell
Anyway.
me, what are you looking for in a husband? Exactly.
Exactly. Okay.
How many kids would you like to have with me, Colleen?
I don't know. We'll see. I want a big family.
Like 5, 6 kids, let's go. Can your body handle that?
I find it kind of hilarious. I mean, it's fine. They're young and having a conversation, but it's kind of hilarious to me because a lot of scenes on this show, and maybe they just highlight them, are people counting the amount of kids that they want to have. And it's often a lot. The people, 5, 10. Someone earlier, I didn't show the clip of it. I want 10 kids. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But I find that it's sort of funny because, what do they say in war that plans... I'm terrible with idioms. I know right now some of you know exactly the idiom. I'm just going to I'm going to Google it. So I Googled it. Idiom plans don't stand the test. And I can't find anything. I mean, I didn't look very deeply, but anyway. My point is that people will make plans, and then when you actually engage the plan and you engage in the theater of the plan being enacted, the reality of the chaos of the situation and a lot of unpredictable factors actually show themselves, and then you have to throw the plan away. Actually, for you therapists out there, and particularly you novice therapists or you trainees, this is an important thing to learn, because a lot of trainees, a lot of novice therapists, because of their inherent imposter syndrome, universal imposter syndrome and anxiety and inadequacy feelings that they have about being a therapist, which is an unfortunate aspect of being a novice therapist that as a mentor I really try to help people with as best I can, but you can't really get rid of it. Because being a therapist is one of the most complicated jobs you could ever do. And also there's very little indication overtly that you're doing a good job. It's really hard, unless you're working with really particularly narrow sorts of clients where there's measures of anxiety reduction or something, which is pretty rare. Anyway, for you, if you're a novice clinician or really any level of clinician and you have anxiety, one of the things that clinicians, therapists will do to alleviate their anxiety is to plan. They will, before a session, like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And 99% of the time, like no joke, that's not an exaggeration, once you enter into the session with the client, the plan does not apply. And to force the plan down the client's throat would actually be harming the client. So what I tell people is there's nothing wrong with making a plan. And if that alleviates your anxiety, fine, because maybe you just need to do something. And so planning helps to reduce your anxiety. But be ready to discard it, because 99% of the time, it won't fit. In your head, you think it'll fit, but you just never know what clients are going to bring to the table, how they're going to react to things or whatever. So typically for most therapists, it's not a good idea to force an agenda. Now, some therapies and some therapists do have an agenda. There is a plan, almost like a curriculum that you follow. There are certain protocols of therapy that actually require that. So in those situations, planning is important, obviously, but in most situations, it's not. So I don't know. It's just funny that they're all just like 10 kids. I'd love to see all these individuals who are talking about having all these kids. I'd love to check in with them 30 years from now and see if it actually happened. Because I'm just going to take a guess and say that it didn't. Because, you have your first kid and you're like, oh, it's a glorious experience, of course, very meaningful, very important, very wonderful. But, there's a lot of downside. There's a lot of consequences. And before you have experienced them, you might not appreciate those downsides and might not be incorporating them into how many kids you plan on having.
Passed out, we called paramedics. And he just passed away at the hospital. They never brought him back to life. And my mom at the time had benign brain tumors. So they weren't cancerous, but they were very aggressive. They didn't respond to chemo or radiation. And then she passed when I was 18. So I lost.
Yeah, I remember that her parents died, but I forgot the details. Yeah, that's rough. So at 13, her dad dies of seemingly a heart attack, I think, perhaps. And then mom dies from benign brain tumors, non-cancerous, that were growing. Yeah, I'm not a physician, so I don't know anything about the details on that. But so then mom dies 5 years later. Yeah, that's really rough. That's really rough. And people have been asking me, given the hypothesis, one of the hypotheses about Zenib that's out there is that she has abandonment traumas, and as a result is distorting what's happening, and betrayal traumas probably more specifically, and is distorting and displacing that trauma onto Cole, seeing behavior that a lot of people would just consider to be benign, if you will, as being more nefarious and hurtful than it really is. And so, could you develop that that set of schemas, betrayal schema, abandonment schema, from parents dying, even though before that you had a good relationship with your parents? Yeah. I think you'd have to be pretty young for that to happen. Typically, a lot of our schema development is 0 to 5. And I know that for some people it's just like, it's just so typical of a therapist to say, but it really is true. Can our schemas change, and positive, negative, otherwise, post 5 years old? Absolutely, it happens all the time. In fact, that's how I see therapy, is trying to actually change one's schemas such that the displacement, the projective identification, the coping skills, whether it's putting up walls or being hostile or interpreting things wrongly or pulling away from people or being preoccupied, schemas are involved in that. And if we can change those in whatever way we can, possibly therapy, then you don't have to manage them anymore. So with these schemas, and with however we phrase it, whether it's an attachment style or a schema or a personality trait or defense or something, they're all basically different words highlighting different aspects of the same thing. Is that on one hand, you want to be aware of it in the short term, because the more aware of it you are, the better you are to manage it. But you still have the impulse and the intrusive thoughts and the overreactivity internally. So you're always trying to manage it and differentiate as best you can. So self-awareness can go a long way, but you're still struggling with it on an ongoing basis. Long term, you want to have corrective experiences so that you change your schemas, for example, meaning that with abandonment schema, betrayal schema, I'll just talk about betrayal schema, you're experiencing betrayal of some kind. Sometimes that could be parents that are going through divorce and they're not paying attention to you. It could be abuse. It could be divorce and a parent leaves or is very inconsistent attention to the child. It could be that the parent is depressed and is in their bedroom sleeping all the time. That could be felt as a betrayal if you're a child, and an abandonment. It could be an illness like cancer or something, or COVID, that can result in the parent not having the capacity to be attuned as much as the child wants. Again, we're talking 0 to 3-ish at this point. And so there's a belief that people will abandon me. It's just inevitable that it's going to happen. People will betray me. That's what's going to happen. People are prone to betrayal of others. No one really cares. I'm the only one that really cares about relationship. Everyone else doesn't really care. I want to believe that they care, but life has shown me that people don't really care. And when you have those absolute assumptions, it's what we call schemas. You have this way of believing and interpreting what's happening around you. They're just like, you just take them for granted and they run in the background and you're not really aware of it. You're operating from that schema. And so for these individuals, when you go through a corrective experience, so you become aware of it, and you're like, well, I think this person I'm dating is about to betray me, but that could just be my schema kicking in, and so I have to be a little skeptical of my assumptions about what this person is doing right now. They might be, but they might not be, and if I just run with my feelings, I might actually shoot myself in the foot and cause the person to actually abandon me. But you're struggling with it with a self-awareness. And then long-term, you want corrective experiences where you have secure relationships that do not betray you and do not abandon you. And when you experience that, sometimes the therapist is that relationship, because it's a contained, controlled environment that the therapist can engineer to be that way for you. Then it's a corrective experience, and then the schema actually becomes reduced. Thus, you don't need to have self-awareness as robust in that area, because you're not having the intrusive thoughts, you're not distorting as much. That can be effective and has been shown by research to be effective. Corrective experiences, relational therapy, transference-based therapy, there's all the various different words for it. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about corrective experiences. So for Zeneb, could it be that the death of her parents resulted in what looks to be possibly betrayal schema? Again, I can't know that, and it's not a diagnosis anyway. It's just a conceptualization of people's personalities. It could be, but if she does have abandonment betrayal schema, I would suspect that other things happened when she was younger. And we want to be careful about just cherry picking the little bit of information that we know about these people, because it's very surface level information that we know, and drawing conclusions from those very rare data points.
My dad at 13, and then 5 years later, I lost my mom. So I kind of call my teenage years like my absolute grieving year. Like I truly grieved for like a decade.
Yeah.
But it made me grow up really fast.
Wow.
Right, I forgot about that. And of course, that makes sense. So it caused her to grow up really fast, essentially parentification. And that can be an unfortunate side effect of the tragedy of parents dying, that the children lose their childhood. And even though it's understandable that that would happen to her, right? Like, let's say the dad dies when she's 13, and then let's say the mom does a lot of things to try to protect Zeneb from being parentified and tries to protect Zeneb's childhood. But there's only so much you can do. Just the fact that your dad dies means you have to deal with things that we would want people to have to deal with perhaps later, after they've gone through childhood and the freedom of teenage years, that kind of thing. So the mom could have done a lot to protect, or maybe not enough, who knows. And either way, she becomes elevated, and children that go through that, even though they might not blame consciously their parents for destroying their childhood and making them grow up too fast, internally these people often have a lot of resentment, because they're watching other kids just be kids and have the freedom to do that and not the burden of what they're dealing with. And it's natural to get resentful. It'd sort of be like if you're at a job and you're working your butt off 65 hours a week, and you're just working, and then someone right next to you is getting paid the same or more, and they're, totally chill and working like 7 hours a week. Like, it's natural to get resentful of that, to get angry. That's what it's like for parentified kids often. And you end up feeling like the world owes you things, because it does, frankly. You can listen to my deep dive on Nagy and contextual family therapy. Nagy is spelled Nagy, and a big part, or a significant part of that theory, has to do with what they call the ledger of fairness, meaning that when you are growing up, you are experiencing, hopefully, a lot of people giving you things, and then you are giving back, kind of, right? So you're getting more than you're giving. And that ideally leads to what we call constructive entitlement, where the individual graduates into adulthood and feels entitled to some things, but not a lot of things. Because everyone should feel entitled to some things, right? Like, I'm entitled to be respected. I'm entitled to not be abused. I'm entitled to finding love. We feel entitled to some amount of giving to us. But when the ledger of fairness is off and you're not getting as much as you feel like you should be getting, and even if you're giving more than you're getting, right? And it should be asymmetrical to children, right? Children should always be getting more than they're giving back. And so for those people it's imbalanced, they retain that into adulthood in what they call destructive entitlement, where the individual feels destructively entitled to more than is fair for them in the current moment. If you look at the full ledger throughout their entire life, they do deserve more, but not from the current person, right? Because often destructive entitlement will get imposed on their partner who had nothing to do with their parentification growing up, or their children, right, who deserve, the parent should be giving more to the children, but sometimes destructive entitlement will result in the parent taking more from the children than they give. If some of you have parents that kind of fit this bill, you might know enough about your parents' childhood to know that your parents went through a very difficult childhood and didn't get enough. And so one way to look at it, it's not a scientific thing, but it's a model of looking at human beings that seems to hold water, that it's destructive entitlement. So can one develop destructive entitlement because of parentification that could result in perhaps some of the behaviors that we see on the show? Yeah, it could be.
Oh, you have a story, girl.
I do have a story.
Wow. I did not expect this date to catch me the way it did.
So I don't think I showed, but I forgot this, that for Cole, seemingly Colleen was at the top of his list. And then he meets with Zeneb, and she talks about this, And he talks about in interviews post-season about how when Zenib talked about this, it really resonated with him. And he felt a lot of empathy for her. And also it aligned with his desire based on previous dating experiences. I think that he was looking for quote unquote depth. And this could feel like depth. I would wonder if Cole still sees it that way, because tragedy can be deep, of course, but you don't need a tragedy to be deep, right? Like Colleen would say in a postseason interview, people wanted me to go deep, but my parents are still alive and I don't have any traumas. And, I had a very cushy life, personally, myself, Kirk. I've had a very, very protected life. My parents are still alive. We're coming up on their 60th wedding anniversary. There was extremely low conflict in my family growing up. Me and my siblings love each other, and we love our parents. And, we went to church every Sunday. I'm not saying that, that's the end-all be-all, but just to kind of paint a picture. We lived in suburban, rural Seattle. My grandparents all lived till they were pretty old. 3 of the 4 of my grandparents lived past 90. My grandparents, I said. Did I say parents? I meant grandparents. Yeah, very low trauma. And at the same time, I would like to think that I could go deep if I were dating someone and they asked me to go deep. So the fact that Colleen said, now maybe deep means something different, but I wonder if for Cole, he would look back on this and say, like, I think I misinterpreted tragedy with depth. Because now maybe Cole additionally saw depth in other ways with Zenib, which I could see, especially in contrast with Colleen, the way she presents, because she will overtly even admit like she's not a deep person or she's not comfortable with that. But anyway, so it's interesting. So that Cole would have, this kind of would inform a little bit more about the pool scene, right? Because the way that I remembered it, Zenib was always at the top. But rewatching this first episode, I think Colleen was at the top. And then Zenib catapulted because of this disclosure, and you can kind of hear him changing in this moment.
Wow. I did not expect this date to catch me the way it did.
Sorry.
No, it's not sorry. That's a really good thing. I feel like you're doing a great job of sharing. I just started to like you a lot more after this date.
And I wonder if for Cole, given what we know about his previous marriage and the way he talks about it, if he walked away from that divorce wanting open communication, because I think the way that he frames his first marriage, and who knows if this is accurate or not, I'm sure it's not entirely accurate. We'd have to hear her side of the story. But that for him, he feels like she harbored his ex-wife, because he frames Zenib and his ex-wife in a similar light, in that they both harbored extreme anger towards him and didn't communicate with him, didn't give him a chance to respond. Whether that's true or not is, we don't know. But so I could see him emerging from that first marriage, which I think was not that long before the season was filmed, that he would say, you know what, I want someone who is open, someone who tells me things, someone who is disclosing about what's happening on the inside of them. I don't want someone that hides things from me. And so when Zenib discloses this, it could be interpreted that way. But he will find out that Zenib might, depending on what really happened, but in terms of what was shown to us, the edit, Zenib seemingly definitely harbored a lot of secret anger. I mean, I think Zenib would say, well, no, I did tell him some things, but in terms of the intensity, the way that it's edited anyway, the show, it was pretty clear that Cole had no idea about the intensity and the amount, or even that it existed for the most part, until he was in front of everyone at the altar and she's blasting him. So, I don't know, but it's just interesting to kind of see that.
Oh.
I'm just being honest.
Are you getting soft on me?
No, I'm here to find a wife, and you just hit like every major category of awesomeness. And
right, he just like, oh, you just checked this huge box for me that I've been trying to check. I've been looking for this quality in someone, because it's pretty common for us whenever we're dating someone and we're attracted to them. I can't remember the idiom, but I think there's some kind of saying that we're not necessarily running toward this next person. At the very least, in part, we're running away from our previous relationship, which causes us to overemphasize and overcompensate certain qualities in the next partner. And you might find this in your dating where you're like, I dated one person and I hated this one thing about them. And I would be damned if I was going to date someone that didn't have that thing or did have that thing. And so I found someone that, was definitely different than the last person, and so I felt like this would be a perfect person, but when I dated him, I didn't realize there's all these other issues with that person. And so maybe that's what's happening here with him. All right, well, that is for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.